ngoro dzongoto dzauya vakomana, hondo yaJehovha watinonamata, ngoro dzinopatsanura kururama nekusarurama, ngoro dzinosandura mamiriro eshe.
For decades, people in ZANU-PF have responded with cheers to the insult that they cannot find anyone in their ranks as brilliant as Robert Mugabe. Now, everyone is entitled to their foolishness, but only if that does not do incalculable harm to our country. So even now, they insist that because no one can be found in ZANU-PF to replace him, at the ripe old age of 94, Robert Mugabe will be their candidate for president in 2018. The worst thing Zimbabweans can do is to allow for this foolishness to continue until 2018. I really believe that the greatest gift the generation of our fathers can give us is convincing the president that it is time to retire while there is still anyone who even remembers that he was once admired as a hero of the liberation struggle. Zimbabwe has never had a shortage of intellectual capital to deal with the problems of an economy a fraction of the size of a company like Google. Now, to put things in perspective, Zimbabwe's GDP is about US 13 billion. Google's market capitalization at 391 billion is 29 times our GDP. We have many brilliant Zimbabweans who are much sought after advisors to the world's largest democracies and Fortune 500 companies, but who President Mugabe and the government of Zimbabwe has had no use for. Some have even offered to help. I remember 10 years ago, a small group of experts in global economics, finance, and international business diplomacy putting together a paper outlining the framework for repositioning Zimbabwe in the global economy and accelerating economic development. We made sure it was received at the highest levels of government. Now, even though the government found the paper to be thought-provoking and even admitted that the counsel provided would have helped turn around the economy, they responded that they needed to study the authors. So none of the ideas would be implemented until they had gathered enough evidence to prove our bona fides as true Zimbabweans who truly loved our country. Now, unfortunately, in our country, only those who uncritically follow ZANU-PF and cheer the insult that only one man knows what is best for our country ever pass the government's test of loyalty. Everyone else is a traitor. Now, that includes the thousands of Zimbabweans the government itself sent out for further training after the Manpower Development Survey of 1982. The idea that it is not the president who is to blame, but his underlings, is nonsensical because he is the sole appointing authority for all the cabinets we have had since independence, and whose performance he must take full responsibility for. So I want to go on record as suggesting that instead of tinkering at the edges, it is critically important for Zimbabweans to press for the president's immediate retirement. We also cannot accept one of his current lieutenants taking over, except on an interim basis leading to free and fair elections. If, like they have always believed, they were not intelligent enough to replace him before, how much more damage would they do to our country if they took over going forward? I don't believe that our finance minister's desperate attempts to secure funding from the IMF has anything to do with truly caring about the suffering of the Zimbabwean people. I think what those in power realize is that they cannot keep the security services and those sectors that have supported them pacified anymore because there is simply no money to do that. For that reason, it is critically important for us to have our voices heard by the international community so that they do not extend our suffering by bailing the ZANU-PF government out. We must insist that any international financial support must be granted only if the president retires forthwith, and upon any interim government that emerges agreeing to enforceable conditions to guarantee a free and fair election in 2018. Clearly and thankfully, the giant of fear in our country has been felled, thanks to the Davidic efforts of those who have refused to cower before our Goliaths. The heroes of the struggle for change have often had to endure the hostility of people who are supposed to be on their side, much like the biblical David was rebuked by his own brother Eliab. David was not in the least intimidated by his brother's insecurity. Responding in the 29th verse of 1 Samuel chapter 17, "What have I now done? Is there not a cause?" Most of us know the rest of the story. So David felled the giant with a slingshot, emboldening the warriors of Israel, who had been greatly afraid of Goliath, to come out of their hiding places and to make sure that the victory against the enemy was a comprehensive one. Friends, there is a cause. And I want to suggest that the work can only be finished if this struggle is owned by everyone, and every sectoral and generational competency is leveraged to achieve the broadest mobilization and engagement of every Zimbabwean, not just to protest, but to vote for change. I believe the four inseparable goals that we must focus on are: one, to make our voices heard by the international community so that they don't financially bail out the government of Zimbabwe before President Mugabe retires. Secondly, to engage every Zimbabwean to come up with an unassailable plan of action for change and a blueprint for the rebuilding of our country. And thirdly, to resoundingly win the election scheduled for 2018. And fourthly, to make sure any electoral outcome predetermined by those in power and which is inconsistent with how people will have voted does not stand. It's easy to become complacent because of some recent wins against the government. Clearly, there was cause to celebrate the collapse of the case against Pastor Mawarire, just as there was cause to celebrate at Strive Masiwa's improbable legal victory in 1997. Now, 8 years earlier, the Sandura Commission's public inquiry into official corruption led to 3 ministers resigning and 1, Maurice Nyagumbo, committing suicide. Now, nothing changed for the better after that. Corruption became more entrenched and government more repressive and less accountable. So this is not a system that is easily changed. The giant of fear might have been felled, but we still need every hand on deck to make sure this work is completed. Let me say this finally. Each generation must hear the words of Shechaniah, the son of Jael, in Ezra 10:4. Arise, for this matter belongs to you. And each generation and each sector of Zimbabwean society must speak to the other Shechaniah's words of assurance to Ezra. We will also be with you. Be of good courage and do it. Nyika Ndeyedu Tose, is there not a cause?
Hasi honai, nasi zaitika,